thank Diana very much for that introduction. She was one of my early postdocs. I think she was the third postdoc to join my lab. And looking back on all the postdocs that were in the lab, I got to be careful because I know some other postdocs are in the audience. But Diana really was the most fun. She's a very witty, intelligent person. We used to tease each other a lot and play games. But in addition to that, she published a number of really great papers that I'm still very proud of. So what I want to talk about today is educating for success. And you can see on this slide a lithograph. I'm going to come back to that as my last slide. So the thesis I want to present today is that being an educator makes you successful. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great, thank you. We all know that, of course, when you teach somebody, that helps them become successful. But this thesis is really that there's feedback, and when you teach somebody, you actually benefit from that. And I suspect that's fairly obvious to this audience, since there's a large number of really excellent teachers in the audience. But it's actually not that obvious outside of a place like the Society for Developmental Biology. I've spent my entire career at a medical school, a research-intensive environment, and it's not uncommon for young faculty to say, why should I teach that class when I'm going to get promoted on my research and grants only? So about 20 years ago, actually, I started running a number of workshops on various career development skills for faculty down to undergraduates. And in the last 5 or so years, I've been happy to say that a colleague of mine, Susie Manser, who I see sitting right over there, has partnered with me. So Susie, I want to thank you for your dedication to mentoring and putting up with me in all the workshops. We do have fun, I think, right? I hope. But I think a lot about grant proposals. I've written a lot of grant proposals, and I teach others how to write grant proposals. And so whenever I approach something, I tend to think of it as a grant proposal. So I'm going to turn this into a hypothesis and make the hypothesis being an educator makes you successful. And I have to tell you at the outset, this hypothesis really sucks. There's no way we're going to really be able to test this hypothesis, so I'm not even going to try. We're just going to say it's a hypothesis. Now, there's two important concepts to get across when you're writing a grant, and that is simply what are you going to do and why are you going to do it? And we make our trainees practice this in 3-minute elevator pitches until they get it down cold. Today I have the luxury of not really doing anything. I'm going to tell you some things. I'm going to tell you a story, and we always tell our trainees to write their proposals as a story that are very clear, concise, and a compelling story. We call this the 3 C's, so they remember to hit each of these points. This story is going to tell you a bit about me, and I think you'll find that many of you, if not all of you, started as a scientist at a much higher level than I did. And so my belief is if you care about science and you're passionate about science, you can succeed in science, no matter how you start. And I'm going to tell you about how my experience has taught me that educating others not only leads to their success, but also to your own success. But mostly I'm going to talk about other people today, some of whom you know and some of whom you don't. And some of what they have taught me that has contributed to my success. Now, I do have a disclaimer here, because 2 of the people I'm going to be talking about today are in the room. And those of you who know me know I like to tease people and sometimes even embarrass people. But I promise today, and Ida, you're one of them, I promise today I will not embarrass anyone. Or at least I'll try really hard not to. Fingers crossed. Okay, so the second important concept to follow is why should I care about what you have written as a reader? Or today, the question for you is, why should you care about what I'm going to talk about? And the answer to that, at least in my thinking, is that if this hypothesis is true, that being an educator makes you successful, then it becomes an important pathway to achieving your career success, and it should be integrated into your strategy for becoming a successful scientist. So let's begin with this story, which is really going to be a series of short stories. And I want to tell you, although I didn't have a great start, in some ways I had a very auspicious start as a potential scientist. Has John Gurdon left the meeting, or is he here? I think I'm going to be safe on this. Okay. So I had my first publication on February 18th, 1954. And I thought I'd ask the audience, does anyone have a publication from 1954? I thought John Gurdon might. Anyone raise their hand? Great. Fantastic. So what was my first publication on February? Oh, by the way, what was February 18th? It was a holiday. That's Washington's birthday. That used to be a big deal in this country. And this publication appeared in a very important periodical called the Berkeley Herald. It was on the front page of this periodical. And I have to point out, this is not Berkeley, California. This is Berkeley, Illinois, a much less famous place. Maybe 1,600, 1,700 people lived in that town. And this publication occurred, I think, once a week. So, tens of people probably read it each week. So here's the front page. I still have it from that time, and it caption says, "Small boy dreaming." And you can see my father reading a story about Washington to me. I'm 4 years old in this picture. I was supposed to pretend I was sleeping, but I actually fell asleep. And I'm dreaming about Washington in the background, as you can see. Now, because I care about data integrity, I have to tell you that this photo has been manipulated. Not using Photoshop, but it has indeed been manipulated. So you see that I had this very early publication, and I think if a graduate student walked into your lab and told you they had a publication at 4 years of age, you'd say something like, "Oh, I'm sure you're going to be successful." So clearly, success was at hand. So what really could go wrong? Well, in fact, something did go wrong, and it was something called junior high. So what happened in junior high is near the end of junior high, a letter came to my house telling my parents that I was failing 7 of the 8 subjects I was taking. Well, my parents thought they should do something about this. It never occurred to me to do anything about it. I thought it was just fine. But they thought I should do something about it. And this is when my father stepped in with a plan. And this is my father. He was a self-made businessman. He ran a service station called Freddie's Shell Service, where service is our business, as you can see. And his plan, well, first of all, what he said to me was, "You need to learn to be responsible." I'd like to know, have any of you had parents that said to you, "You need to be responsible"? They definitely said it to me. And they were right. So his plan was I would go to his business every day after school. I would bring my schoolwork and I would do it. And then after that, I would start working. I would serve customers at $1 an hour, so I could be rich, make a lot of money. And that worked very well. And I quickly learned that I could actually do the homework if I would spend some time doing it, so I could do it very quickly. So what happened then is I not only learned how to pump gas, which is relatively easy, as you all know, since it's self-service now, but I also learned how to repair cars. And this was great because it taught me a number of things. It saved me thousands of dollars in car repairs over the years. And as Diana will probably remember, it made me the chief person in the laboratory to fix broken equipment. That became my main role. But this plan of my father's actually worked quite well. It taught me a number of important skills that I used throughout my career, as you see here. And my grades improved, and as a result of that, I actually graduated junior high on time and went to high school. Now this is where another bit of drama comes in. In my freshman year of high school, after the first semester, I was walking through the hall one day, and a girl came up to me, and this was a girl I went to junior high with. I'll tell you, her first name was Nancy. I won't tell you her last name. And in junior high, Nancy was without a doubt the smartest kid in our small junior high. She was also, in my opinion, the cutest girl. So I cared about her opinion, but she came up to me one day in the hall, and she said, "Gary, there's a big problem." I said, what do you mean? What's the problem? And she said, well, they just posted near the cafeteria all the freshman students who got selected for the honor roll. And they made a big mistake. They put your name on that list. Well, to be honest, I had no idea what my grades were going to be. So I didn't know if she was right or if she was wrong, whether it was a mistake. So I have to tell you that this stuck with me a really long time. And I kept trying to figure out why Nancy would think I couldn't be on the honor roll. But at this point, I have to tell you a grandchild story. Is that okay? I thought about actually making the whole talk about my grandkids, but I'm going to refrain from doing that and just tell you one story. So I have 4 grandkids, ages 7 to 12. 3 of those grandkids are girls and 1's a boy. And one day, the 12-year-old who's about to enter junior high, so thinks like a junior high girl now, in about 2 weeks, she came up to me and she said, "Grandpa, do you know that girls go to college to get knowledge?" And I thought, wow, this is a chance to really impress my granddaughter. I'm always trying to do that. So I said, "Amelia," that's her name, "that's great that you're thinking already about going to college. But here's where I want to impress her." I said, "Did you know that I'm a college professor? I teach college students." Well, unfortunately, this is when I realized she was setting me up, because she came back very quickly, without a pause, and said, "And boys, they go to Jupiter to get stupider." So it was clear to me what Nancy was thinking. It took many, many years to figure that out. Nancy was thinking I had a one-way express ticket to Jupiter on a rocket, and I would never be coming back. Well, as I said, this bothered me for quite a long time. My high school was a lot bigger than my junior high. I never had a chance to interact with Nancy again in the 4 years of high school. So I never had a chance to talk to her about whether or not I made it on the honor roll. But there is a slight possibility, just because of luck, that Nancy is in this very room. And so I wanted to prove to Nancy that I actually did make it to the honor roll. And this is my honor roll card from 1963 to 64, first report period, my name, and my homeroom. So if you do see Nancy, if she's not in the room, please tell her I actually did make the honor roll. Okay, so I made it through high school, decided to go to college. I went to a local college, and as an undergraduate in my sophomore year, I ran into this new professor of biology named Robert Sweeney. Bob Sweeney was an inspiring teacher who introduced me for the first time to embryology or developmental biology. It was called embryology in those days, by lecturing from Belinsky's book. How many of you read Belinsky's book? A lot of you? If you haven't, it's still relevant today, and you can buy it on Amazon for just a few dollars. He also taught me about the beauty and utility of the chick embryo for experimental studies. And somebody mentioned, I think the quote was, I think we'll all agree that the zebrafish is an awesome embryo. And I fully agree with that. But I also think the chick embryo is an awesome embryo. And I think all embryos actually are quite awesome. Okay, he made me his TA for his vertebrate embryology course after I took the course, and that's really where I learned embryology by teaching it. I then decided to go to graduate school where I met this gentleman, Ray Watterson, and he became my major professor. Ray was really a master teacher, a true selfless mentor who gave me the freedom to pursue my passion. But probably what Ray taught me that was most important is he believed that pursuing science was really important, but you can't forget about people along the way. You have to help people and help them succeed as well as yourself. And I also TA'd his embryology course for the next 5 years. All right, so what I want to emphasize here is that there's a sphere of influence from mentors that can affect you even if they didn't directly mentor you. And what I'm showing on this slide are 4 mentors, Sweeney and Watterson to the left, B.H. Willier, and then to the far right, Frank Lilly. What B.H. Willier here was trained by Frank Lilly, Watterson was trained by B.H. Willier, and Sweeney was trained by Watterson, and their mentorship was passed down to me as a graduate student. This is probably the only picture that exists of me as a graduate student, but it really doesn't matter because I look almost identical, right? You'd know me anywhere. Okay, I consider myself, and I think I would today if a student like me walked into the lab, that student, as very raw material. In fact, I've often asked myself, if I were a mentor, would I have taken me on as a graduate student? And I think about that a lot when people do walk in my lab or in my office and they're asking to be mentored. These mentors taught me about the excitement of doing research and creating new knowledge and the importance of passing this knowledge down to others. But they also fostered my love of the chick embryo. Since I was teaching the chick in laboratories, this is the classical 33-hour chick embryo, the Hamburger Hamilton stage 10-11, and a series of cross-sections through it. And for 39 years of running the lab, virtually every question we addressed centered on this organism roughly at this stage, perhaps a half a day or so earlier and a day or so later. It was my main experimental model throughout my career. So I want to fast forward to life as a faculty member, where there's a number of important things that happen as a faculty member. You have interactions, of course, with your family, which tends to be growing at about that time. Of course, students and trainees come and go, and scientific societies and conferences occur. And I don't have time, of course, to talk about all these things, but I do want to emphasize the support I've received from my family throughout my career, and I've had truly wonderful, great students and trainees who have been my delight. I'm going to talk very briefly about scientific societies and just tell you, like many people have said at this meeting, that my first scientific meeting occurred at the Midwest Regional SDB in 1970. I was an undergraduate, and as luck would have it, the very next year, in 71, we hosted that meeting at Elmhurst College, where I was a student. I gave my first talk at a Midwest Regional in about 1976, not exactly quite sure of the year. I was a graduate student, and I'll tell you in a moment what I talked about. Okay, so I want to end now by talking about just 3 people who were shown in this photo. I really had a hard time with this because I thought I probably could talk, maybe 50 people, maybe 100 people, and certainly didn't have the time, because I've learned a lot from all of you. So these are just 3 examples of people who have taught me a lot. I'll begin with the person on the right. Ray, are you here today? I saw Annie. I don't know if, yeah, is he here? Great, thank you. Ray, I promise I won't embarrass you. No worries. I like to think of Ray as my scientific brother, and that's because we overlapped at the University of Illinois in our graduate training. So he is my scientific brother. He taught me everything I know about Xenopus gastrulation, and I thought I knew a lot until I heard his talk again the other day. I know so little compared to what he knows. It's really amazing. But what I'm really proud of is my very first publication, and this is what I talked about at the first regional meeting, was with Ray Keller. In 1977, I was learning SEM as a graduate student. He was finishing up, I think, or maybe finished his fate mapping using vital dyes of the Xenopus gastrula. We were co-teaching a laboratory section of an experimental embryology course, and one night when things were kind of slow, we planned out doing this experiment. And that resulted in my first publication. I think Ray's second or third, I'm not sure exactly which. But what Ray really taught me is to think hard about developing structure and function and how they're related, to formulate hypotheses about developmental mechanisms. And I think that was really illustrated by Ray's talk the other day. And I just want to thank Ray for his continuing friendship throughout all these years, and Annie Sutherland as well, who I thought I saw on this side somewhere. Thank you both. You're both great scientists, of course, but you're also really wonderful people. The next person I want to talk about, unfortunately, isn't here, and that's Scott Gilbert. Scott was the first winner of this prize back in 2002, and of course, he's the author of Gilbert's Developmental Biology. Do I have a clock somewhere? Is this the clock? So I've gone 14 minutes, is that correct? Yep. Have 10 minutes? Okay. Thank you. He's one of the developmental biologists, the few developmental biologists who understand turtle development. Show of hands, who understands turtle development? Yeah, not too many. There are a few, though. And what I think Scott taught me the most is you really can't know too much developmental biology. Okay, Ida, you're getting nervous. I can see you squirming. So I first interacted with Ida a number of years ago, and it came through email. And I don't know if you even remember this, but what I remember about that is I needed to ask you a favor. And I had never spoken to you before, and I don't even know what the favor was at this point. So I really carefully crafted an email. I tried to be as polite as I could, as respectful as I could, hoping that Ida would respond positively and do me a favor. So I sent off that email, and later in the day, I went back to the email in my send box, and what I typed was, "Dear Dr. Chow," I told you it was going to be very formal, but my spell checker changed it, and it became "Dear Dr. Cow." I thought there's no way in hell will she do this favor for me. But you know Ida. Ida, I'm sure, just laughed it off. And Ida and I became good friends, I think, after that point. We traveled together, my first trip to Brazil, where we did some lecturing. Very importantly on this trip to Brazil, she introduced me to something called caipirinhas. And the picture shows Ida in my kitchen on a visit to our house, cutting up limes to make caipirinhas. I consider Ida the crown jewel of SDB. SDB is a great society doing great things. Thank you. I'm